What is up, everybody? Gary Simon here. So today I have 7 CSS techniques that I commonly use. Now, some of these are things that maybe you've already known. Some are quite simple. Some are a little bit more advanced with newer properties when it comes to CSS. But basically, these are what I found in creating a new Scrimba course that's releasing in a week or two. These things are what I found that I use most often. All right, so hopefully you enjoy this and you find use out of it. If you did, make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet. And let's get started. Now wait one moment, you're about to watch me talk about CSS. Now, you might not be a very good front-end developer, and if that's the case, you should definitely check out the front-end developer career path at scrimba.com. They've recently launched their front-end development career path, which is a collection of courses that cover HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, and much, much more, as you see. It's over 75 hours of awesome content. There are hundreds of interactive coding challenges, and it's all geared towards helping you go from beginner to someone that's hireable as a front-end developer. So check out the first link in the description below to get 50% off. All right, so these are in no particular order. So let's talk about, the famous meme about centering a div, right? Very simple now these days. So we want to have this div, which could have a bunch of child elements inside of it or not. And we want it centered vertically and horizontally. So 2 properties is all it takes. And so here's our HTML. We have a class of parent and then a div inside, and these divs could have other divs inside or other HTML elements. And then with our CSS, we have the parent right here. And all we have to do on the parent is specify display grid, place content center, and there we go. It's as simple as that. And in many times, if you want it to, the parent or the elements inside it to be, correctly vertically aligned, then put height 100 viewport height if you want it to be in relation to the actual size of the viewport, or 100% if this parent has its own parent or something like that. Very, very simple, but very handy as well. Okay, so let's talk about this one. This doesn't necessarily have to apply to headings, but what I'm talking about is this little graphic right here. So back in the day, what you would do is in your HTML, you would have like a div element that said like border or something, and then you'd have another element like for your H1 right here. But now we don't have to do that. We just take our pseudo elements and we can use before or after in order to create extra graphics like this. So the way it works here, we have our H1, my awesome heading, and then for our CSS, we have the actual parent element, which is the H1 itself, and we want to specify position relative on it. And then we take this same element and add the pseudo element of before or after. We put an empty content property, and then we put position absolute on the pseudo element. And the reason you put position relative here is because when you use the properties like top, left, bottom, and right for anything that's position absolute, if you don't have position relative here, then this little blue thing will, if you put top 0, it will go all the way to the very top of the browser. So position relative makes the positioning of a position absolute element relative to the parent right here. So top would be right here in the case of like an H1, like a heading 1 element or something like that. So very, very handy. I use this all the time. Next up, so let's talk about white space. All right, so let's say for instance, we use like an absolute unit for our white space. And this could be if we were targeting this right here, this could be like the background of a website where we'd use padding for the inner white space, or if we use margin, this would be on the outside to create this white space on the right and left here. So if we used absolute values or relative values like pixels or ems units, and we had no media queries, and we stretch this out, it doesn't change. It's not fluid. So what if we wanted the white space to be fluid and adjust automatically like this? Right here and here. Well, we could do that without the use of media queries. And of course, this is for any element that you want to apply to. And we can use the viewport width. Very simple. I know many of you know this already, but some of you may not. So just take like, depending on where you want to add this at, like the white space on the outside of an element would be margin, and on the inside of the element would be padding. And this works perfectly. You can also use viewport height as well. So you can create vertical white space that's fluid. All right, so another one, let's say for instance, we want all of our elements in terms of the typography, the scale of the type, the font size, as well as the padding and the margin or the white space to automatically just scale up by changing one property in our media queries. Well, just like this, or just like this. All you have to do to achieve this is change one property in your media queries. So of course, this can be any element here in terms of HTML. And then we take our element that we want to apply this sort of automatic scaling of sorts. Margin and padding, you use, generally speaking, M units. And the M units will be based on the font size of the same element, all right? So then we take our font size and we can use rem units. And so 1.3 would be simply 1.3 times the size of the font size of your HTML element or the root element or whatever. So you take 1.3 times 18 and that's what you would get. So basically by default, when you're starting with your mobile first, your CSS, your font size by default for browsers is 16 pixels. And then when you have your margins and padding set up using M units and your font sizes set up using rem units, then all you have to do is wrap this right here, this rule set with HTML, or the root element, inside of a media query. And then, on like tablets, you might bump this font size up from 16 to 18 or something like that. And then everything else, your M units and your rem units, will increase automatically. Very, very cool stuff in that realm. All right, so let's also talk about fluid typography. All right, and this is achieved with a relatively new CSS property. So take a look at how it's automatically grown fluid based on the width here. This might be tablet. And then maybe on desktop, you might want it to stop growing. So notice it only moved positions, but it did not increase. So how do we do that? Again, any type elements. This could also be applied for other elements, not just typography. We can use font size. We use the clamp property. And of course, I've covered clamp, I think, in 1 or 2 videos already. And the way it works, it's just a function that we have 3 parameters, a minimum font size, the preferred font size, which is kind of strange to call it preferred. I would say it's just the fluid portion of it. It's in between. And then the maximum font size. And so usually when it comes to the preferred, you're using some sort of calculation along with the viewport width in order to create the truly responsive or fluid sizing, depending on what this clamp property has been, or clamp function has been applied to. Next up, let's say we have just this asset, this photograph, right? And we want to use this photograph as like a background on some type of div element. It could be the background of the website or whatever, or just a div element. And then we also want to use a tint, or we want to apply like opacity towards it. Well, the newbie might take this into Photoshop and just do all this editing and then just export the asset, like the JPEG exactly as is here. But you can do all of this, of course, in CSS while using this actual asset here. So the way we do it, or the way I do it at least, is we take our div class, we'll say it's an image, and then we take the same sort of approach that we used in one of my other tips, where we take the actual element, position relative it, and then we use a pseudo element of before or after, and then use position absolute here. And then we take the background image, and then we use like the URL property, and we specify the actual image. And then we just set the opacity to like 0.3. And then you could also optionally use background blend mode and change it to screen or any of the other many type of blend modes out there. And then that way you don't have to bake in exactly what you want in a photo in an application like Photoshop or whatever. Very, very useful. So now let's talk about the very last but not least. How do you achieve these really cool reveals? And it doesn't have to be just on text. Let me show you original here. It's kind of real quick, but you can do all sorts of really cool clip-based animations or transitions. And it's very simple. And basically this works on any element. And you take the element and you use the clip path property. And those of you who watch this or this channel know I use this a lot. I love it. When it comes to the clip path, it has a few different options here. You can use a polygon, a circle, or ellipse. And I'll show you what stuff here means in a second. And then you transition the clip path. And then with like JavaScript or something like that, you can attach another class to it where it has a different value here for your clip path property. All right, so I love using the clippy CSS clip path maker, and just go to Google and type that in. The URL is right here as well. And so in the case of like the little text reveal I just showed you, you take like a trapezoid, which is just like a square or 4 points essentially, and you hide everything initially. So I drug those little points up so everything's hidden. And then here's the output. And then we drag them down, and then everything's revealed here. And then that's what you would put in the animate class in the example that I showed. And that way, when you transition it, it'll smoothly reveal whatever that clip path has been applied to. Awesome, awesome stuff. All right, awesome. Hopefully you enjoyed that and you learned something new. If you want to see more of these types of videos, let me know in the comments. As always, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.